This video is brought to you by Devout Decals, makers of reusable Catholic art for your home altar, your bedroom, and your home classroom. Monday morning, I broke the news story to you that the Vatican has signaled that there will be discussions on how to create a non-ordained diaconate for the ladies. This has been in the works, according to Dr. Mike Hickson and others, for at least 5 years, as Walter Cardinal Casper let spill in February 2024. That he, going back to the previous year, there had been hints of this in a papal document called Kyria Amazonia, which was the document that emerged from the Pan-Amazon Synod. That happened in October 2019. That was the event that the Pachamama debacle happened, with the veneration of a pagan idol in first the Vatican Gardens and then in St. Peter's Basilica. The document that emerged from that synodal process include references to a non-ordained diaconate for the ladies. It was Cardinal Walter Casper's idea. But how do we get there? Well, you have to have a vocations crisis of immense proportions. And one part of the vocations crisis that nobody talks about is the lack of bishops. Francis is having a very hard time replacing bishops when they retire. We are now at a time in church history when there are more retired bishops, or bishops who would be retired, serving in their dioceses as the ordinary in a sort of lame duck period than any time in recent history. He has ordained like one bishop, or consecrated one bishop, and put him in as a local ordinary in an American diocese, one in the last couple of years. This is some remarkable stuff, so let's get to our story. Bearing in mind the ladies' diaconate question that looms over all of this. So, headline from the modernist outlet, Our Sunday Visitor. And yes, they are a modernist outlet. Analysis. Major changes in store for Latin Church in U.S. as bishop appointments stall. Is it any wonder that in the United States, bishops' appointments have stalled? It shouldn't be any wonder. Francis has waged a war of words with the bishops in America. And his mouthpieces especially. Using his mouthpieces, he's waged this war of words. You've had men like Cardinal McElroy and Cardinal Supich, who both speak for Francis. When they speak, they're speaking to the bishops of America. They've talked about how they have failed to uphold his key program items, chastising them for not complying with Traditionis Custodes, chastising them for not embracing Fiducia Supplicans, and chastising them for not getting on board with the Laudato Si program. That one being about the everything green and our care for our common home. When they speak, they're speaking with the voice and authority of Francis, essentially, trying to get them to get on board. And on that latter issue, the Laudato Si program, they have. The bishops, as I've reported a couple of times already, have said that they had made the mistake of allowing laity to have non-governmental organizations, like non-profits, do the work for them, and it hasn't worked. So they're going to start doing it themselves. But he puts pressure on these bishops using his lay voices, and sometimes just categorically says things himself. I've reported numerous times the harsh things he said about the American bishops and how they're almost schismatic, which is amazing to think about because the American episcopate isn't even that conservative, let alone schismatic compared to Francis. But here we are. That's where we are. And with that, he's having a hard time replacing many of them, which may be almost divine intervention if he does go to his particular judgment and we get a more moderate pope afterwards, who will fill that with more moderate men, thus keeping the balance as it generally is. But here we go to some details. Quote, change looms over the horizon for the American hierarchy, and the anticipation continues to build as the appointment of Latin Church bishops in the United States has seriously stalled out over the last year or so. With Milwaukee Archbishop Jerome E. Listecki turning 75 on March 12th, there are now 19 dioceses, 12 with bishops serving past retirement age, and 7 vacancies in the U.S. Latin Church awaiting the appointment of a diocesan bishop, also called an ordinary in the Church's law. Only one Latin Church ordinary has been appointed in the last 6 months, in addition to the appointment of 5 auxiliary bishops in the same time, one of whom was Bishop Jeffrey M. Montfortin, a Detroit Archdiocese auxiliary bishop who headed the Diocese of Steubenville, Ohio from 2012 to 2023. The last year has seen an early end to a number of episcopal tenures in the U.S., as several active diocesan bishops retired early or expired prematurely. In 2024, the American Episcopate will see 15 ordinaries reach retirement age, 8 of whom are metropolitan archbishops, including 2 cardinals, Cardinal Blaise Cupich of Chicago and Cardinal Daniel N. DiNardo of Galveston, Houston. And 2025 is set for 14 American diocesan ordinaries to reach retirement age, 6 of whom are metropolitan archbishops, including Cardinal Timothy M. Dolan of New York and Archbishop Roberto O. Gonzalez Nieves of San Juan, Puerto Rico. It is not uncommon that bishops remain in their office for a year or 2 after reaching 75. Questions emerge about how healthy it is for a diocese to have a lame duck bishop in office too long, though, not to mention what kind of leadership vacuum can be created when a diocese is left vacant too long. End quote. This news that the Synod on Synodality is going to empower and create a non-ordained, non-sacramental diaconate for the ladies explicitly talks about governance and things. It explicitly talks about putting these ladies in charge of dioceses and such in informal kinds of ways, but allowing them to have authority in some matters over bishops. That's the future that the modernists want. And you get there when you have a vocations crisis. There are plenty of auxiliary bishops in the United States that could be tapped for becoming ordinaries of not particularly important dioceses relative to some of these big ones that are opening. And then you shift around some of these archbishops to becoming cardinals or bishops to becoming archbishops in other places. That's usually how it works. I've been waiting, for example, of this for Pastor Jimmy Martin of the Jesuit Church to be named an auxiliary bishop in San Diego or Los Angeles or some other New York, maybe some diocese that would fit his internet and media needs. We saw that 10 years ago now with now Bishop Robert Barron. He went from being a normal priest to an auxiliary bishop, and he was sent to a diocese that had a huge media presence before he became an ordinary in the middle of nowhere. But he still maintains that huge media presence, despite that, because he's talented. You're going to see the same thing. Some of these bishops' offices will be filled, but not enough. It's almost looking like it's being done on purpose, especially with you have this women's diaconate thing happening in the background. That is how you get to a position by you create the need for it. Create an artificial need for more lay leadership. This is what the Synod on Synodality has been all about from the beginning. Lay leadership of the church. We've talked about this many, many times. Not just myself, but other Catholic YouTubers have talked about this many, many times. Let's go back to the article, though. Quote, the man at the center of appointing new bishops is Cardinal Christophe Pierre, 78, Apostolic Nuncio to the United States. He's already past retirement age. He should be retired already. Widely respected by American bishops who are often characterized as critical of the current pontificate, Cardinal Pierre was named a cardinal by Pope Francis in 2023. Cardinal Pierre's new standing as a member of the College of Cardinals puts him on equal footing with the American members of the Vatican's dicastery for bishops, Cardinal Cupich and Cardinal Joseph W. Tobin of Newark, New Jersey, who are typically regarded as part of a progressive minority of the U.S. bishops. This is largely what accounts for, in the minds of veteran church watchers, as a largely moderate, non-ideological series of appointments. The flurry of appointments expected across U.S. dioceses in the next few years comes amid reports that more than a third of the candidates asked to accept the nomination to the episcopacy are rejecting the appointment. There is no question the clergy Ted McCarrick problem would be a serious factor in this, but so too is the changing landscape of ecclesial life. U.S. bishops today are broadly presiding over decline as pews empty, resources dwindle, and the ecclesiastical institutional footprint shrinks, not to mention a decrease in candidates for the priesthood and religious life, and ever-growing divisions in the church. It also remains to be seen if U.S. dioceses might be restructured with possible mergers and suppressions on the document. Such changes could usher in new models of episcopal ministry over time, and the current generation of bishops would be laying the framework for that now. It's possible that in the future, episcopal ministry could look much more hyper-local, with bishops as pastors of regions much smaller than what now compromises a typical diocese." End quote. That last bit is a contradiction and a pipe dream. You cannot talk about there being a shortage of bishops while then saying we're going to break down the dioceses and make them smaller, because that then necessitates more bishops to do the governing. Unless you've got some plan in the back of your mind for having a bishop overseeing, as a bishop, multiple dioceses, but having some sort of lay administrator, like a non-ordained diaconate. That's how you get there. They've created this problem, partially because Francis can't help but slam the church in America. He does it all the time. He can't help but do things that a good portion of Catholics in America don't support. And this isn't limited to the United States, but that's what the thrust of these articles is talking about. But you see this problem in France, you see this problem elsewhere, any place you care to look at the church. A lot of priests don't want to become auxiliary bishops because they know once you're an auxiliary bishop, there's a very good chance that you're going to go from that, if you're remotely competent at the job, to becoming an actual ordinary of a diocese. And they don't want that. Not in a time of hyper-division in the church, not in a time when the pews are emptying, except for traditional parishes, which are now being actively suppressed. They don't want that. And so Francis creates his own problem, and now a solution presents itself in the form of Cardinal Walter Casper's proposal, going back to 2019, if not earlier, of a non-ordained diaconate for women. But the more basic problem here is this, though. The reason we have this also is that Francis is just not good at managing personnel. So we get this from Gloria TV. Headline: Roman diocese in shambles. Yes, his own diocese in Rome is in shambles. The one that he directly governs himself. Remember, the Pope, whether you believe he's Pope or not, the world accepts him as Pope, and as such, and so does the Church, so as such, whether he is or not, he's governing the Diocese of Rome, the Archdiocese of Rome. He is the Bishop of Rome. And it's in shambles. There was a reform implemented in the Archdiocese of Rome, and he took over personally how Rome is run, because typically there was a sort of a cardinal vicar in charge of the Diocese of Rome for the Pope, so that the Pope could, govern the church broadly. But Francis he implemented that reform and then never actually started running the diocese himself. And he says nasty things about the priests and bishops there, and so he's just caused a collapsing vocations. They're now going forward into 2 years in Rome without new priests. Morale in the Diocese of Rome among the clergy is at the lowest it's been. And you have to ask yourself, is this a competence issue or is this by design? Because the Synod on Synodality, its central theme is decentralization of authority in the church into the hands of laity. And what better testing ground for this will there be than the Diocese of Rome, where Francis has been busy destroying the morale of priests, not ordaining new priests, and where he can personally oversee, or at this point more likely, his successor, if he gets the successor he wants, can personally oversee the imposition of this on first to the Diocese of Rome and then elsewhere. It's a hypothesis that this is how it's going to play out. But yes, we have a shortage of bishops, and it's been artificially created by a charismatic man who uses negative charisma to bring down morale in the church, especially among those who should become the next generation of bishops, but for some reason don't want the job. Odd how that works. Let me know what you think of this in the comments, please. Hit like and subscribe if you haven't, it does help. So to sharing this on social media, that helps too. And if you've ever thought about becoming a patron of Return to Tradition, either through Patreon or Subscribestar or the join button below, now is a great time to do it. It helps keep these daily messages coming. As always, pray for the church. I'm Anthony Stine. Ave Maria.